Hi, welcome to another session. This one with Kevin Indig, one of my favorite people in the industry, super smart, and apparently lots of data.
Jason, it's always good to be here. Thanks for the compliments. I'll come back.
Brilliant. Well, Claude was the one who told me you had a lot of data. And every time I had conversations with Claude about who could come on this summit to show me or to help me to demonstrate, this, which is the Kalicube framework, your name just kept coming up. Claude was really insistent that you were an important person to have on it because you're going to bring a super duper viewpoint on it.
It's clearly the best model. I mean, what can I say?
Yeah. Brilliant. So I'm looking today with you at this part, which is grounding and displayed. I've talked to Krishna from Microsoft. I've talked to Michael King. We've got different perspectives on it. And it's particularly in the display part and how we're measuring it and what we can do to improve our chances in a world where AI-assistive engines and AI-assistive agents are opaque. So we start off with that. How do you measure SEO performance in an AI world? There you go. Small question.
Small question, yes. Look, I think first of all, it's critical to understand that I think the measurement approach is very different from what we've done before. In the SEO world, in the simplest sense, we looked at keyword ranks, traffic, maybe impressions, and then connected that to the baseline of the business. That old click funnel does not work anymore. And I'm not saying that clicks don't exist anymore. They do, but they're not trending in the right direction. And so from a purely agentic perspective, we need to think about leading and lagging indicators that point towards business impact to make sense of it. But it's all directional. There is no direct bridge anymore. If you want a hot take on like the meta point here, to meet my hot take is that attribution for channels that are not related to advertising is basically dead or it does not work. So we need to think about leading and lagging indicators. And under leading, I would cluster things like bot crawls, right? Like is our site even crawled and visited? Things like retrieval. Can we make sure that bots can retrieve our content? And then in the middle of that pipeline, I would look at things like mentions and citations, ideally in a relative context. I think absolute values are not helpful since there's too much change and too much noise. And then on the lagging side of things, that's where we can think about methods like self-reported attribution, meaning when people sign up or buy a product, you ask them, how have you heard about us? You can do this a bit more elaborately. And then maybe even things like for B2B businesses, is there like some sort of CRM attribution that we can give our customers or prospects mentioning how they found us, those type of things. But it is very opaque. And there's a lot of black boxing going on. I'll spare you the TED Talk for now. But I think even in the way that we structure and design prompt tracking today, there are significant gaps.
Right. And number one, asking people how they found us is going to be the next thing we all need to do on the checkout form. Obviously, you don't want to create friction, but you do need to know. And I'm asking people on sales calls, how did you find us? And most of it is I ask them, who's the best in the world at knowledge panels? And it says you. So Claude likes me almost as much as it likes you. And the second thing is my series of articles on Search Engine Land, 19 articles that lay out the Kalicube framework, started because Rand Fishkin in February published a findings where he was saying, I think it was 2% of responses to queries are the same. And his argument was, this is completely random. There's no point in tracking it. And my counter argument was, if you search my name or Kalikube's name on any of the machines, it's very consistent. And that's because I've cleaned up my little corner of the internet. What's your take?
The fact that these are stochastic models should not lead to the conclusion that tracking them does not make sense, right? Like we track a lot of probabilistic things like the weather, credit scores, right? So not everything is perfectly deterministic. And even keyword tracking was never that perfectly deterministic, right? There was personalization that Google did, for example, more so on the local side of things based on the device that you're using. Ranks jumped all the time if you track them daily or hourly. So, the thing is that keyword tracking and SEO, like we agreed on a unified tracking method There was not as many platforms as we have today in this AI world. So
Mm.
I think we're going to work through this as an industry, and we're going to find methods and approaches that work better. But we need higher rigidity of what we track and how, right? Again, just to give you a glance into some of the gaps. Right now, most prompt trackers just track a single version of a model like ChatGPT 5.5, but there are
Mm.
differences to 5.4, 5.0, right? Like they're model versions. There's a difference when it comes to high or low reasoning. There's massive differences in like response length, in citations, in fan out queries. There's no common standard for fan out queries, right? There's just all these gaps that as an industry, I think we can work through and hopefully raise that 2.2% to maybe, 30, 40, 50%. I also expect a certain slowdown in development and the shape of these models as the broader AI industry discovers that this is all pretty expensive and compute constraints, et cetera, et cetera. So I agree with Rand's broader point that this is a different thing than we had before. There's a lot more randomness in here, which means we need to be careful. And I think we can adapt to this, and we can find models that help us make good choices over time and track their impact. Where I'm not confident today is in the direct attribution. So I'm not sure if we'll ever get to a point where we can, with incredibly high confidence, say what exactly the business impact is. I think it's going to be much more like billboarding, right? Where we can infer, we can get to some confidence on business impact, but we're never going to know for sure.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm actually very grateful to Rand for having published that, because it did set me off on a 19-week, one article per week on search engine land. And it was a real discovery for me as I worked through. And at one point I thought, okay, I've got a degree in economics, and micro and macroeconomics is a great parallel. We've gone from microeconomics to macro. You don't measure inflation by pretending that you know every price of everything. I go downstairs to buy my loaf of bread. It isn't going to be 3% more expensive because inflation is at 3%. So it's the basket of goods idea. How would you approach that? I've got my own approach, but how would you approach it?
It's a great point. I love that analogy. So the way that I approach inflation measurement in this case is some ways that you can make prompt tracking better. First of all, AI / LLMs are highly personalized, right? Even today, OpenAI published a new article about improved dream states in ChatGPT, meaning the way that it collects memories and structures them, etc. So it's much more personalized, which means that we need to operate on a persona basis. So one of the first things that I do with most of my clients is think about what are the key personas that we're going after, what are their characteristics, and most importantly, what are the jobs that they're trying to do. So if you are, to give an example, right? If you're a CMO at a software company, you're evaluating a new CRM to buy, then you evaluate that from a different perspective than, say, the sales reps that are using that CRM every day. So we need personas. Start with 3 to 5, but you can technically develop hundreds of synthetic personas, right? I'm not going to get lost in that topic, but I think it's a very important one in the tracking world. So first of all, who are we talking to? What are their jobs to be done? Second of all, let's talk about intent. And I'm talking specifically about buyer intent. Within every persona, I usually like to look at 3 to 5 different stages of intent, from just trying to understand what this is, like what is a CRM, all the way down to should I buy Salesforce, right? I'm like very close to a decision. I'm just trying to gain confidence in making that decision. And between those, there are obviously like 3 or more steps. So personas and jobs to be done. And then you need the right level of, or the right number of prompts. I also like tracking prompts 3 to 5 times consecutively to understand what the retention is of the parts of the answer, from citations to mentions and whatnot, and track weekly instead of daily. I think daily prompt tracking is way too noisy. We're averaging that out anyway. But if you run the same prompt a couple times consecutively, you better understand the consistency in the AI answer. So these are like a couple of ways that I make AI inflation tracking much, much more accurate.
I'm quite stunned because we've come to more or less the same conclusion sitting in our different parts of Europe. I've called mine the funnel query pathway, and it's cohort intent mapping. So I have different funnels, each of which has a cohort intent combination at the bottom. And I figure out the persona by saying, what is the ideal question they would ask just before they convert? Whether or not people ask it doesn't actually matter. It's what's the ideal query? And then I move up the funnel and say, what's the query before that? And then at the top of the funnel, ask, given within this particular topic with this cohort intent, and you describe it, which brands are top of mind? So
Right.
I've got a kind of diamond shape, and then measure that going down using brand mentions, prominence, and sentiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It makes perfect sense, right? Like, because again, at the end of the day, it's all a proxy, and that's totally fine, right? Like, we don't need. There's no way to know exactly what people prompt, but
no. And
it's fine if you approximate it.
Sorry, the second thing is I agree with you about weekly. People are tracking daily, they're tracking hourly, and as you say, it just creates a lot of noise. But I love your idea of tracking 3 times in a row to see the consistency. Sorry, I cut you off. Please finish what you were saying.
No, you're fine. I love that we riff on this. But yeah, 3 to 5 times consecutively. I did like a large data study, and we found that after 3 prompts, about 2.2% of citations remain. So there's obviously a lot of nuance, like what types of topic, what types of prompts we're talking about, but just to give people an idea of how much variance there is. And it is high, but again, like we can like, instead of saying, none of this matters, none of this is relevant, we need to crack the nuts and not shy away from it.
Right. And I know a couple of questions come with that. Number one is Claude was right. You do have a lot of data. Number two is getting a link is something that people are quite obsessed about. Being in the grounding set and getting a link. How valuable are they in truth?
So look, I did a larger analysis to understand what the, looked at hundreds of thousands of query pairs with pages, and I looked at all the common link metrics from SEMrush to basically understand, is there a correlation at least between some of the link metrics and visibility in terms of AI mentions? And there is the strongest correlation that I found. I think, I don't remember the exact value. It was above 0.5, so fairly strong. Was with SEMrush's aggregate link quality score. So essentially, you can say that high quality links have a fairly robust correlation with AI visibility. Now, I do think there is a bit of a red herring here, though, because I think it's not necessarily the links themselves. I think it's much more the mentions that matter here. And we know that mentions of brands on authoritative sites matter for LLMs. Now, I would argue there's more than just a plain mention. There's probably also the context and the sentiment and the attributes that they're connected to. You're the expert in the field of entities, Jason, so I will not preach to the choir here. But I think links matter a lot less and mentions matter a lot more. And this is something that Google has sort of included for years now, but LLMs really care about this. And there is a whole more or less black market around AI mentions that is somewhat similar to the black market that we had for backlinks. And it's going to be very interesting to see if LLMs or search engines are taking action against that. But right now, I can tell you that companies are willing to spend, $400,000 to $500,000 a year for the right mention in the right place. This is not a small thing. This is a big thing. Not sure if it's worth that amount of money, but there's a there.
Yeah, and well, that's another question: is the engines, OpenAI, for example, Perplexity, don't have the means to analyze to the extent that Google and Microsoft Bing can. So there must be a weak spot there for them in that they don't have the finances behind them to be able, in the infrastructure, to be able to analyze to the extent that Google and Bing. Do you think that's a fair point, or do you think I'm exaggerating?
I think there are more signals pointing at OpenAI building a web cache, right? Like just indexing the web, essentially. And I do have the impression that reasoning is able to filter out a lot of quote unquote manipulative brand mention inserting or like manipulation. So I'm not sure how big of a problem it is, I will say, right? Like spam is obviously happening and spam is working to some degree, but I'm not confident it's as effective as a lot of people make it out to seem. Again, I think it goes back to like the right measuring methodology, like how do you define your prompts and what are you looking at, and et cetera. But in the grand scheme of things, I have yet in my own usage to come across spammy results or like a clearly manipulative answer. I've been scammed on Google search results not too long ago. But when it comes to LLMs, I'm not sure how effective that really is. But at the end of the day, we need more data to really give a better answer to that.
Brilliant. And I mean, the advantage they have over the search results, the old search results, is there's actually an analysis of it and an evaluation and a weighting to figure it out whether or not it is probably true or not. And Christian was talking about the grounding and the amount of, I mean, he was saying it's an amazing, I can't remember what he said, but stunning piece of engineering, the grounding. And the second piece he said, which I found interesting, is the follow-up questions is a stunning piece of engineering that's quasi-human. I didn't say that, I'm paraphrasing, but the idea that the engine is programmed to try to help you move down the funnel, and that's a very human thing to do. And for him, that's a huge piece of engineering.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's massive, and it's probably only possible for certain companies at a certain scale with a certain data repository, but also a certain usage, right? So if you're Perplexity, and it seems that Perplexity has fallen behind severely against, say, ChatGPT or Gemini, you're getting a lot less reinforced learning from the usage, right? So the more people use an LLM and then ask follow-up questions, accept them, give a thumbs up, etc., the easier it's going to be for those LM makers to then improve the system side-wide. So there is a real moat, there is a real network effect, similar to how Google uses clicks and user engagement and whatnot to make the search results better. You have the same system in AI based on how users react to your initial answer, and the data advantage there is pretty clear. That's why I think there's so much more advanced in coding. I mean, coding is much more deterministic than everything else, but it's much easier also to say whether the output was good or bad.
Yeah, and you make the point Google has a huge data advantage. It also has the entire funnel plus the post-click of data, and they're the only one who can actually measure the entire customer journey.
Totally, yeah. I think they won the race at this point. I will be honest, Jason, I think I left enough traces across the web. But I was not sure in the beginning when ChatGPT came out at the end of 2022 if Google would be able to respond, but they truly have in a fascinating, outstanding fashion. And I think now it's pretty clear that they're owning the consumer space. With all the implications and kind of challenges that it brings for the web, right? Like you have this whole economy that basically grew on classic web search results and traffic, and I don't think that can continue even if Google adds more links to their AI answers. I think this genius type of is kind of out of the bottle here, and brings us back to the earlier point, which is why improving the way that we measure the presence of our brands and the biases that models have about our brands is so critical.
Yeah, and brand is the foundation, and that's my favorite topic in the world.
Yeah, it's a foundation, sure.
Yeah, and so I'm looking at this and say, okay, we're going to have search engines, assistive engines, and assistive agents all living together. Search isn't going to die. It will continue to exist because people like to window shop, and people will want an agent to do the job for them because they're willing to delegate. And I'm looking at the delegation boundary. Where do we as human beings delegate? From allowing the machine to choose the 10 top results, to allowing the machine to recommend the top 2 solutions, to just letting the machine do it.
So look, it's fascinating because I ran this user behavior study with my business partner in crime, Eric Van Baskirk, where we recruited a panel of around 50 people, average non-technical, non-marketing people. And we gave them tasks in AI mode and in the classic search results, which includes AI overviews, but the classic search surface. And those tasks were related to high ticket purchase items, right? So basically, people were supposed to buy a laptop or a washing machine, those kind of items, insurance, etc. And we wanted to understand their behavior and compare it across these two different surfaces. And what we found is that when users encounter a shortlist, so like here's the 5 best insurances for cars or something like that, 75% of the time they'll pick the first result. That is a very similar behavior that we know from like pre-AI search, where the top result gets the most clicks. That is still alive, just that people don't necessarily click, but they act on the first result. The only factor that trumps shortlist rank is trust. So what we saw is that when people know and trust a brand in that shortlist, it doesn't matter where it's ranked, they will always prefer it, right? So there's literally videos that are published in write-up where you can see a person looking for insurance and they read the first one and like, oh yeah, that's the first one, that must be the best. And they're like, then they find Geico, like, oh no, I know Geico and I trust Geico, that's the one that I'm going with. So the way that people react to, first of all, it's scary how little scrutiny normal people do against AI answers. And second, there's this behavior of a shortest rank. And third, trust is, in my observation, the most important good in this AI world that truly determines also your presence and future when it comes to visibility.
Right. So, I mean, I would paraphrase that as a human being, if I don't have an opinion on the list that I've seen, I'll trust the machine.
Perfect paraphrasing, yes.
And the idea that we use an engine because we trust it is, generally speaking, a fair point. You use ChatGPT because you feel that it's giving you the answers that help you along your way. Another question is, if we're moving to macro measurement, is there any danger if we start measuring micro on the search results, macro in the assistive results, and then micro again with the actual agent making the purchase, but macro above when the agent's coming down the funnel on its own?
There's absolute dangers here, as in so far that we need to have consistency across the different numbers and metrics that we're measuring, right, to your point. And I think there was like, that tension already existed before AI when it came to classic SEO. Everybody knew that search engines care about topics much more than single keywords, but still everybody measured keyword rank, right? And then sometimes you have it rolled up into a topic, but there was never consistency about how do we actually measure the presence in a topic in classic search, right? And so I think you're touching on an important problem here, which is that we cannot carry that inconsistency forward, right? We need to keep looking at macro trends and macro aggregates across the different dimensions that we mentioned earlier, across different topics. And then even from an agent perspective, like a single purchase, I would say for most businesses does not, is not indicative of anything. The challenge is that right now the volume is still relatively low. I don't have the agent adoption numbers top of mind, but I would argue that only a tiny section of the population actually uses agents. And there's a lot of semantics too. Is just plain ChatGPT an agent already, or is Claude Code an agent? Like, you know what I mean? We need to define it properly. There are statistics from Salesforce, for example, that said that in the last Black Friday, Cyber Monday shopping season, about 20% of purchases came from AI agents. But again, there's like the semantic question of what even does that mean? You mentioned an interesting, important point that I want to finish with, which is that how much do you actually delegate to an AI agent? And so I'm perfectly happy delegating email triage to my agent, maybe even responding to emails that are, it's perfectly clear what the answer is, and they're trained, etc. But I'm not sure if I would ever delegate fully like certain shopping activities, for example. So I'm taking some supplements. I have like an auto repurchase, like subscription basically for that. But then if I buy, say, like fashion, like I don't want to delegate that because the act of shopping in itself is part of the experience. And then for other purchase items like flights, where I would love to delegate, there's a lot of trust that needs to be built for me to allow an agent to buy a ticket for, I don't know how many euros or dollars, right? But so all that is to say, I agree on the macro point. We need more consistency there. And I also agree on search results kind of existing for a long, long time, maybe in some cases forever, because I think humans don't want to delegate everything.
Right, 100%. That was brilliant. I have one question, which is, of all the data that you've seen over the last couple of years, what's the thing that surprised you the most that you didn't expect?
That is a really good one. I already mentioned how shocking it was to me how much people actually trust AI answers. I think that is one that I can give a whole TED talk around. I would say what's a constant tension in my mind is on the one hand, the strong impact of classic search results, or better said, search rank for fan out queries, how strong that impact still is on citations and in part mentions in AI answers. But then on the other hand, you consistently see that like about a quarter of brands mentioned and cited in AI answers perform really poorly in classic search. And so that's just a tension that I'm trying to keep holding in my head. On the one hand, it really matters, and then sometimes it really does not matter at all.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you, everyone. See you in the next session.
Thank you, Jason.